Hi, I'm Sarah Galbally. I'm the Managing Director of an Australian law firm, Neon Legal.
Hey, I'm Ben Parsons. Welcome to the Player Power podcast. I'm with Sarah Galbally. I'd like to say our resident lawyer, but she's in Victoria. Sarah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Ben. I'm well. Hopefully one day, resident lawyer.
Yeah, I can't wait for free rates. Now, let's talk all things IP. What do you see in the land of sport that commonly comes across your desk that you go, it's so simple, but they shouldn't have done it? What for an athlete?
For an athlete, well, a range of things. There's obviously the day-to-day operational licenses that come across the desk with players giving up their image rights or promoting a product or a brand, and sometimes just the usage rights a bit out of sync with what the deal should really be and the IP required to do that.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean out of sync?
Well, sometimes people are giving up rights that they actually can't give up based on their sport or the league or the profession that they have that actually own their rights in certain aspects to their own player image, their name, all those sorts of licensing capabilities that the league of their sport might own. And they're giving up sort of usage rights in the context that they're not able to actually deliver, or they have to be really careful in the way that they actually frame the rights that they're giving.
So it's common for whether it be an Olympian or an AFL or an NRL, people that end up on broadcast, lots of the marks, and that's as basic as the logo, right? Or the colours for the individual leagues are owned by the leagues.
Correct, yeah.
And then the team jersey is normally owned by somebody, right? Whether it be the club or the league, that is. So their name and image of the individual athlete, though, I'm yet to see anybody actually own that other than the athlete. That's correct?
Yeah, correct. There are some, obviously those rights that are used collaboratively are a bit different. So some leagues actually have got the rights to use the player images in relation to their sport. So there are some technical differences between the different sports leagues. And as you say, the jersey or the jumper in some sports is different. It's placed very differently. There's obviously the colours of different clubs, and the clubs license those colours and names from the league. So players are in that position where they obviously have a fundamental priority to promote their sport and their club and drive sort of revenue and to that club. But at the same time, they obviously want to build their own personal brand. So it's just finding that clever sort of alignment between the licensing rights that they actually give out to different brands and companies to build their own personal brand.
One of the biggest music publishing houses in Australia had a conversation with me about how they chop up rights and what they sell out to different people.
Yeah.
If you're really advanced, is when you say giving away rights or selling rights, how is there many athletes with complexity around how they divvy out their rights, or is it all pretty one-dimensional?
Well, there's many ways that you can do it, and the standard that we've seen developed over the last 10 years is that sort of influencer space on social media. And then we obviously have different collaboration rights that people work on collaborative projects with different brands and put their name and face to it. So those old school endorsements, and those are still very prevalent. And then you obviously have sponsorships and different ambassador sort of agreements that are arrangements between players and brands to really be a brand ambassador. So you still see a lot of those various sorts of rights being distributed amongst players in different sports.
Okay, so if you're building your own brand and you're trying to be nice to the sport, so I divide sport up into two categories, right? There's the broadcast sport and there's non-broadcast sport. If you're broadcast sport, you tend to be, if you're a male, you tend to be okay financially in terms of if you're a female, you earn okay money, but you're semi-professional because you have to have one or two or three jobs. And then there's the others who might represent our country at the Olympics but don't get paid very well at all, almost nothing. So if you're trying to build your brand and be part of the system and play nice with the administrators that own everything, explain to me how you would start breaking up your rights to begin with. Like, where do you start with the basic that's not going to upset everybody, and where's pushing the line?
Well, I think what I'm seeing a lot of in sport is where players are really focused on their true brand in themselves and running it like a business and starting that journey to really push themselves for the future after their sport. So when they retire as an athlete, they have that brand to fall on. So what I'm sort of seeing at the moment is a lot of player managers or different sports personalities themselves are really harnessing their personal profile and building with different brands and different products and sort of finding that space that feels really genuine to them and represents their sort of why and what they want to do. And I guess what I'm seeing at the moment is a lot of brands are really dealing with people on a longer term basis than they used to. So it used to be chopping up the rights and doing this bit here and that bit there. But now what I'm seeing is a more wholesome approach and brands actually coming on board with different players to sort of build a more of a legacy approach. So life after football or tennis or cricket, whatever it is really harnessed on something that's very, has good synergies with the person and what they represent. So I'm seeing more of those broader deals being done for the sort of longevity of their career with the idea to have a legacy set up for afterwards.
But I assume from this conversation that would actually have to be somebody of relative large stature. Like, it's not the bottom 50% of athletes running around a field in a broadcast sport. That have to be in the top 5 or 10%.
Not so much. I'm seeing it even in sort of not the elite sports people in their sport. I'm also seeing it across the board. So a lot are actually using their image rights to get smaller deals and sort of build up that narrative about themselves and what they represent. And it's very diversified at the moment. So I don't know if you saw recently, Lady Gaga has gone on board with an Australian retailer and their foundation to really build her personal brand as a philanthropist away from music and sort of build that personal side of her. And sort of those longer term deals obviously are for those elite in their craft and certainly in sport, but definitely down to the more junior players are now starting to see that has real synergy for them for life after their sport, and playing enables them to sort of build that brand, and you've got to start somewhere. And if you start building your social profile and you start building that following of influencers and start endorsing things that are genuinely suited to what you're about, then you're seeing a lot of growth in that space very quickly. And so players are actually able to use their story, some personal experience or something that's very unique to them to build on that relationship with brands and have a more lasting effect.
How do you not upset the NSO or the club? Like, okay, you built your brand pillars and you're aligning with brands that are authentically aligned with you. How are you not upsetting clubs then?
Well, what I see is a lot of players are doing it a little bit in tandem with the clubs. So they will support the club's social media, they'll support doing things over and above to help the club, but then they've also got their own priorities and their own, self-business of self-promotion really. But they're actually able to still help the clubs and bring those, partners or sponsors a little bit closer to the club as well and see if there are opportunities that can be, well aligned. So you're seeing a lot of them are working in tandem now. They're seeing that this big power of social media and of data and consumer behaviour is really driven by a lot of personnel, the image and the use of those players. So they're still trying to work in tandem at the moment. We've even seen in the AFL, the Players Association really come on board to get involved in the media rights deal with the AFL and for the players to start taking a percentage of the rights. You see it in international soccer, huge deals being done, carving up some of the broadcast rights and bringing in brands and different corporate sponsors to help, keep that player with club. And to help them pay for their deal. It's different across all sports, but certainly you can see there's just this innovation now is really strong in how brands can use personal space of players and find that synergy in their sport. It's very innovative.
So you get an audience, and do you see a time in the foreseeable future where you've got a large audience and a club is it doesn't matter what sport you are, if there's two similar people, and one person A has a large audience and person B doesn't have an audience, the person A gets chosen as the contracted player because they can help ticket revenue and merchandise revenue and that for the club. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, you do see that happening, yep. But you also see that they look at that succession planning of where do we go in 2 years, 3 years, and how can we utilise our players and who's sort of the face of the future. And so you see clubs really harness those people and find what's comfortable for them. Not everyone is comfortable being a poster person for their club or their sport. They're happier behind the scenes doing other things to help corporate partners, and it might be appearances, it might be other sorts of commercial rights that they can help achieve. But yeah, you do see that some of them are very much harnessed by the clubs and others aren't. And I think it just changes based on the innovation that the clubs are looking at the time as well.
AFL has a unique drug-taking policy in terms of, you know, if you test positive, it's for your first time, it doesn't get released. What happens if you make a mistake and you accidentally pass off with one of their, what normally is consequences?
For the drug policy, or do you mean for the brands?
For the
brands. So yeah, if you delve into the space of disrepute clauses in contracts, it's obviously a touchy one. But what I see in player deals and those issues when they arise, and I've represented different leagues and different players when those problems have arisen, not so much in drug policies or AFL, so to speak, but generally across, you know, just disrepute issues. So someone makes a gaffe in the public or represent something they shouldn't, that's not in line with the club values or the league's values. The disrepute clauses are in agreements predominantly, from my experience in sport, certainly. But what you see is really a coming together of people to negotiate how this is going to operate, if that player stays with a club or a team or a league, and they really negotiate it out. Those provisions are there as a safety net for the club and the league. They obviously need to protect their brand, and players as well. There's a huge cancel culture now that has really dominated the public space, and so I think the public helps at the moment really deal with those issues as they arise.
Now, what about if you're a brand, right? And the club's got X sponsor and you go with Y, which is their competitor. Mm-hmm. What normally happens to the athlete if they've made a gaffe like that?
Well, normally there will be, it depends which sport, but normally there will be a way that everyone will come to a commercial arrangement. In my experience, the club has that sort of more dominant ability to push the brand to stay with them, just by the scale of economies, basically, when you've got different brands have different amounts of money that they're spending with an individual versus a club. Those sponsorship deals are a lot greater with the club, so to speak. I find that generally the brands are able to negotiate the best way forward for them, and it's important that they do that.
No, but what about how do you know if you're an athlete, right? Mm-hmm. How do you know, and broadcast sport is probably easier because there's a list of sponsors on the wall and on your shirt and your training jersey, but if you're an athlete that's struggling financially and you're trying to do brand deals to make yourself, professional, and you don't feel like you're being helped by your sporting organisation or whatever it is, how do you work? How do you see the best case scenario playing out where the athlete's trying to make some money, the league's trying to control everything, it doesn't matter what NSL it is or whatever. What's your recommendation to an athlete, what they should do?
Well, it really depends who they have representing them. You've got to have a great manager in place that can actually negotiate some options for you, and that's really important.
Let's start there.
Yeah.
What do you think a good manager does?
Well, a good manager knows the value of their player and they know their true value of the player. They also understand where that player's at in their career and what they bring to the table for that club and what they have to offer different brands and partners. They'll know their strengths and weaknesses in terms of their brand and what they can actually deliver. And they'll actually listen to what's going on with the club and how they can best support the club. I think, if the player is able to help the club and bring in that assistance to the club with different corporate partners and sponsors, that negotiation is really powerful. So I think if you have a good manager that understands the player and understands what's happening in the sport, and in my experience, a lot of them are fantastic. They've got a really good understanding of the strategic direction of clubs, a really good understanding of the strategic direction of the sport and where their player's at as well. They know the true value of their player. So I think it's really important to have them doing all that they can to bring in good deals for you and good opportunities that can harness what you need early on.
Okay, well, but take a couple of runs down, because you're talking about everything you've spoken about just in that reference, right? Implies there's a lot of money in that sport. Go to BMX. You're a 15-year-old that's potentially going to represent Australia or maybe go to the Olympics. You don't have a manager. You're riding at a club somewhere, and your parents are probably really managing you, and you as the athlete are trying to figure out where my brand deals should go and things like that. What's your recommendation to those people that are in a broadcast sport?
Well, I think they need to really sit down and work out their strategic direction. As a lawyer, what I deal with is short-term and long-term strategy always. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. If it's negotiating a deal or dealing with the future of a big commercial arrangement or a broadcast rights deal even, what's the now, what's the future and long-term strategy? And I think they need to understand that, and they need to be able to present what their value is and how they can grow. And if they can bring that to corporate partners and they can even do it themselves, it's really core to understanding what that corporate partner really needs and wants and what they value. It's all very well to go and get an influencer arrangement with some corporate partners, but I think harnessing that so it's really true to who that player is and who that BMX rider is, it's really important that they can show that holistic picture, because as they go, those deals will have a lot more opportunity for them to grow and develop longer term. So I think that core strategic focus, which we do as lawyers when we negotiate a lot of deals, is really important for them to look at. It's not just the deal right now, it's how's this deal going to grow with this corporate partner, and choosing those right corporates and sponsors.
So if you don't have a manager, do you think your lawyer should negotiate it? Is that your recommendation for that?
Well, not everyone needs a lawyer in their pocket. We can all negotiate. We negotiate every day with, getting the kids up to school or, going and buying a car. We can all negotiate.
Not everyone negotiates well, though.
Well, there's some skill to it. But at the end of the day, I think if you're dealing with your own brand and your own value to a sport, you should be able to pitch for that. And I think it's about sitting down and really understanding what you're bringing and what they need. And those meeting of minds will be really important for that synergy.
So you're saying don't get a lawyer?
Oh, of course. I always say get a lawyer. Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going through contracts, right, and obviously one of the things that we talk a lot about with people is, a brand will come with XYZ expectation, and you've got to be able to figure out where you stand and where you want to push back and where you don't want to push back on those clauses. How much work, and I'm talking about the perfect world, how much work have you seen done in the previous, that people actually understand their own brand and they understand that they can, where they should push back and where they shouldn't?
Well, I'm seeing it more and more that people are really understanding their own brand. And as a lawyer, it's great to have those discussions with people when they're really trying to understand their own brand. Ideally, you come to a lawyer when you need the help or there's a problem. I think it's always best if you're not capable of reviewing those terms and understanding what it means, it's important to get that help. And that's where, a lawyer or your manager can come in really, really invaluably to that process. But ultimately, it's just about reading it. It should be prepared very simply, and it should explain what rights you're giving up, what you're going to do, how long a brand can use your name, image, likeness, whatever they're obtaining in the licensing rights, and what you're going to deliver for them. And just making sure that you can deliver that, you're prepared to deliver that, and that the terms are also somewhat favourable to you. It's not just about the brand getting all of the rights and having everything in their best interests. It's also about you obtaining some common sense sort of provisions there.
Do you have a formula on how you cost it?
On how we cost a legal review of an agreement?
No, I understand that's just billable per hour. No, the value of the athlete with the brand.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I'm not going to give away all my secrets, but look, we can all work it out. It's some teams have a salary cap, and you have to deal with a salary cap and work out where your player actually sits within that salary cap value. Is someone worth 1.2 million a year, or are they a more junior player? And there's a bit of a scale for the junior players, but where your player's at on the scale of elite and an everyday hardworking role, there's always a mechanism to value your player.
No, but use my BMX example. You're a BMX kid, and you've just won the national titles. Have you got a formula? Like, the global recommendation is 4% of your social media following is your cost per post. Now, it's a little bit higher for most people, but they say that's a general rule of thumb. And for the people that aren't great with maths, if you have 100,000 followers, that's $4,000. So are you adding on to that? Are you seeing contracts where they'll say, okay, your social post is 4,000, my brand image and likeness is 1,500 and something else, and production's $500 and things like that?
Yep, definitely. Also saying where they'll actually put in a value to just the relationship with you. So there'll be sign-on bonuses, and then if in your sport you perform better than they think, or you might have incentives or milestone bonuses. So it might be that you win, a league award, or you meet certain PBs and you win certain races, then there'll be these different incentives. And so you might get bonus payments just for that. But certainly you see all sorts of innovative ways to help add value to a player when they are in a league that doesn't easily define that value.
And do you see the value of those bonuses? Is that like 20% of what the total contract's worth, or is it 100% extra in bonuses? What's
you normally see them as like a fixed fee cash bonus.
But as a percentage of the total deal?
Not really. It's normally that they'll have a budget for what they can spend additional to their arrangements during the year, and so it's a bit of a risky lottery ticket for some brands that think, oh, well, if they do really well, we want to be with them. So, yeah, we will give them an uplift, and we might give them an extra bonus that's, 20, 25% of their annual contract with us. But, yeah, normally it's a fixed fee. Some of them are cumulative, some are not. Some are based on team performance. So if you're the lead in a team, you have to play a certain number of games, or you have to meet at finals or win an award. There's all sorts of ways that they can provide for those incentives.
And are they getting paid before posting the social media or after the social media post?
It just depends. I think in my experience, if there's a lot of content recording and things, they're always being paid beforehand because the usage rights then flow for the use after. And it's easier then for everyone to reconcile that at the end of the year. If things change or there's more work and suddenly the brand has more opportunities for them to be involved, they can then expand upon that. So normally before, but if it's just per post and it's up to the individual to make those posts, I see it after.
So if you've got a partnership with a brand and then a bigger brand in the same category comes along, are you seeing many people exit and go to their competitor?
I've had this just recently, actually, but I don't see them exit. I see it it's a little bit tricky sometimes for different players to get out of those arrangements. And generally it's because once someone wants out, the brand that they're with then says, well, hang on, before you go to that person, we still want to use you. But there's some sort of inherent conflict with the brands. So, yeah, it can be difficult to get out, but sometimes we actually shape in different clauses with that in mind, that, there might be a tennis player or someone in an individual sport, it's more common, that we shape in provisions to say, well, if there is an opportunity that comes along that is going to pay more for the same rights, the player has the exit right to offer first right of refusal to you to pick up those rights at the same value on a legitimate offer from a third party. Otherwise, they can pick up the third party's deal. But it is rare and it is sometimes difficult to get out of.
What age do you think people should start getting their life in order in this world of social media and brands and that?
What age? Well, I think it depends what sport you're in.
It's a very legal answer. It depends.
But it really would, because at that time, soccer players are quite young when they can start really performing well and becoming known in their sport. It just depends really where you're at with it. And some are more adept at picking up these sorts of opportunities than others. And they enjoy that space, and some are very focused on their sport early on. So look, I just think it's when you're ready, when it feels right. I don't think these things, brand deals don't really seem to translate well when it's not a sort of a natural fit. So I think when the player is ready to pick up these sorts of deals, it can be really beneficial financially for them.
Do you not think they should train? Like you're trained to be on the field. Shouldn't you be training off the field? Because you're never really ready, are you?
No, I definitely agree. And look, we see it in schools these days. There's a lot of social media awareness and warnings about how to use technology and the internet, even in schools. I think it is something that players should be trained in and should be taught how to actually do properly, because it's really to their detriment if they don't.
We see a lot of athletes do silly things on social media, whether it's bring themselves and make themselves look silly. But a common one I quite see is that they'll slide into someone's DMs and say something inappropriate. The person takes a screen grab, and then 2 years later it appears in the newspaper or stuff like that, highly inappropriate stuff. What do you recommend? Like, I know everybody gets social media trained and everybody knows what social media is, but how do you, when dealing with a client, how do you contextualise all of that side that no one really likes to talk about, what you do in the dark and things like that? Warney had a personality that everybody knew what Shane Warne was, right? He understood his brand better than most, right? The larrikin Australian,
Correct.
All about having fun, loved punting. I saw a recent video about him, loved Maccas and all of these.
And loved by Australians, yeah.
So within reason, as long as he didn't veer too far out of that character, most of the things that Shane Warne did was acceptable. Go to somebody that's just building their brand and trying to figure themselves out. When you're going through that process and then you do something silly, what is your recommendation on how to de-escalate the issue becoming big?
Well, the first thing I would say is don't make it bigger. If you add fuel to the fire, you're going to escalate it. I would say don't talk about it initially. Let the dust settle, work out what you've done. You need to sit back and collect your thoughts. I often see individuals rush off to comment and say things and then later wish that they'd said things differently and dealt with it differently and actually handled it properly. It's this sort of quick to react response often, because social media will come down on you quickly and people feel they need to react very quickly. And certainly there's a benefit to act swiftly, but I think you need to stop and work out what you're going to do next and how you're actually going to demonstrate that that's not your brand and not who you are, and talk to the brands that you actually deal with and talk to the brands that you represent, because those brands will be very quick to contact you and to talk about how you've represented them and potentially brought them into disrepute. So
explain what bringing disrepute is.
Yeah, so it's when you bring a brand's reputation down, basically. So you might do something or behave in a certain way that doesn't represent the brand's values, and because you represent that brand, you actually then affect their reputation, and so they see that as bringing their brand into the same negative space that you've brought yourself into. So very quickly, brands will contact people that they've endorsed, have endorsements with or ambassadorships with, to talk to them about the fact that they will end their relationship or distance themselves. We see this in celebrity world as well. It's not an uncommon problem in that sense, but yeah, it's something that people have to be very conscious of at the moment, particularly with social media and young people in sport, that when they're representing brands and their league and their club and being that role model to young children in sport, it's still, as it has always been, a very sort of sensitive, it's still something that's very important to recognise, that the way you're behaving is now on a larger scale and now a public domain.
So if you do make a mistake, who do you call first? Because you said brands are going to call you, right? Which I agree with. But you got to take a deep breath, but take the deep breath quickly. Are they ringing their lawyer?
Normally they are, or they're ringing their manager, and their manager's ringing their lawyer. And very quickly there'll be PR and legal talking about how do we deal with the brands and how do we talk to the brands and how do we get the player in front of the brands to explain and to talk about it, and what do the brands want to do? How do they want the player to handle it? And how can we find a meeting of minds there for a mutual sort of arrangement for how the player should best deal with it?
So go down that path. You're the lawyer. You're reading the contracts. You're figuring out the legal position for them. PR's thinking about the spin that they can put into it, and the manager's thinking about how do we keep all the money together. If you're again somebody without a manager, in the time of crisis, I see a lot of people make poor decisions on who they should ring. How do you find a good lawyer, or like what's the process? Because when you're under the pump time-wise for these sort of issues, like you got to make some quick decisions, right? How do you find a good lawyer, and how do you find a good PR person?
Well, normally your manager will have those networks.
But if you don't have a manager?
Oh, good point. If you don't have a manager, then I think you need to set up that support network around you early. If you're going to be entering into these deals, even if it's just someone like myself as a lawyer who you do waive the deal to and say, can you have a quick look over this? I need someone to check it for me. You then have those networks that you can pick up the phone and call when things go wrong. And that's really important, to set up those frameworks around you, that this is your personal business, essentially. And I think that you've got to treat it really seriously and get those good people around you to know how to deal with these problems.
So if you're a rookie and you're young, right? Obviously you got your parents or somebody in your sphere handling you. Your recommendation is to then for them to go with the athlete, but go and have a coffee with somebody like you to meet and greet, so there is somebody on speed dial should an issue arise.
Most definitely. And also just to educate themselves and to understand, have those good relationships with the brand, so that if you do need to act on it quickly and you can't pick up the phone to a lawyer for whatever reason, you have that good relationship. You can jump on the front foot with the brand, and often they'll have PR, they'll have lawyers, or even your club or the league. They have fantastic in-house lawyers, and you can always call them and
to be fair, if you're a brand or you're a club, you're looking after the brand's interest or the club's interest, right? You're not,
correct, but if you have good relationships, I think that can go a long way to put your hand up and say, I've stuffed this up. Can we all sit around and talk? I want to handle this the best way because I don't want to lose these relationships if they're able to be salvaged.
That's very optimistic, Sarah. I'm yet to see that or hear a good story, because management and PR for the individual athlete, if they have management, is about the athlete, right? They care about the club, but they don't really. And if a brand is directly relating to revenue to them, yes, they care about it, right? So, but I see a lot of people get poor advice. Yep.
Look, I don't think that in this current day there's that much. The clubs are actually really good at dealing with players, and they're very holistic in that approach. They're not going to give them the wrong advice, in the sense that they will say, look, you do need to find a lawyer to talk about this. We'll get you a name, we'll get you some options that you can go and have a chat with if you don't have one already. I think that they actually do work a lot better than they would have 10, 15 years ago. I see that space is really growing. The clubs are really protective of their players.
And let's talk through this, because I feel you've drunk the Kool-Aid, right? Because if you're in-house counsel for a club, your job is to protect the club. And the club is your client. That's your
inherent role. But look, they're the bread and butter of the club, and they're also our employees and they're people. And at the end of the day, the club will put them in contact with people that can help them. That's part of their duty, really, to their players, is to support their players. I've not seen a club, unless they've had huge problems with players, which we don't see very often these days because I think things are dealt with very differently and the club really have open arms for players. But I don't really see those huge problems where the club is shutting up shop and pushing the players out the door. I think these days it's a lot more embracing than it used to be. Perhaps in NRL, you might tell me it's different. You're an NRL fan, but...
I'll use an AFL example, right?
Yeah.
One of the greats, Ben Cousins, does one of the most unbelievable feats in terms of both his playing career but outside. I wouldn't say that the club didn't protect their own interest. They were protecting their own interest the whole time. Same with Adam Goodes. I could use that as an example where Adam Goodes, it took AFL 6 years to admit that it was racially motivated the boo, right? So that's where
but again, those are historical examples now. In this space, I do think the tide has turned a bit and now you will see clubs really work with the players. There's been different inquiries into big issues that have happened with the growth of sports in Australia, and I think that different integrity departments have been established to really deal with inherent issues of drugs, of race in those sports, and I think that's been a really positive thing that we've seen grow throughout the years based on issues that have happened. In terms of just people bringing their own brand into disrepute for, posting something inappropriately, I think we see that cancel culture have a big impact and then people have to adapt. But otherwise, I don't see it as being so fundamentally opposed in the club or a player's views these days.
So you think if you're an athlete and you work in a broadcast sport, you should go and have a coffee with the legal department in your club?
I think you should know who the lawyers are.
Yeah, meet and greet.
I think you should know who the lawyers are because I think at the end of the day, if you need a contact or someone and you don't have that in your network, they will be able to point you in the right direction of someone who's capable of helping you. I think your manager is core for that though. I think if you're in a broadcast sport, your manager is that person and they're your first port of call always. They will have those networks behind them that they can. I deal with a lot of managers and player agents who actually will pick up the phone to have me review player deals, review player contracts, brand deals. So I think that they have good networks. You might not know that that's happening behind the scenes, but I think certainly they're the people that you should go to.
Okay, so if you're an athlete that doesn't have a manager and you're not in a broadcast sport, go and have a coffee with somebody that's a sports entertainment lawyer. And if you're in Rockhampton...
What would you do? What would you do then? What do you think you would do? If you were a young player and you didn't know where else to go, to me, I see them come in and knock on the door and say, hey, can I have a chat?
With you?
Yep, if I'm at a club.
Do you charge them in the first coffee?
No, I'm working for the club.
No.
Oh, for the first coffee? No. And we've got, Zoom coffees and all that sort of stuff. You can have a Zoom coffee and chat to lawyers. We're very approachable people.
That's what they say. Okay, so you've after you've gone through your first round of brand contracts and you've started to get used to the world of transactions, how do you yield your brand higher in a legal perspective in terms of what have you seen? I know you said there's bonuses for, if you win a medal or you get your team wins a bunch of games or you as an individual wins a bunch of things. But how do you actually keep driving value proposition for your own brand, which makes brands, ultimately pay you more money?
I've seen some sports people do it really well in Australia, and then I've seen a big gaping hole of where some are just not doing it at all, where they're trying to then yield and leverage that further. I think probably the things that I'm seeing are people actually doing collaborative sort of products with brands and sort of driving that personal space with a brand, so that true collaboration endorsement of products, and then creating that legacy sort of brand for themselves that has more longevity. So I see that as their way to sort of change the dial and bring in more revenue from those deals.
Are you seeing any athletes with logos yet?
Not so much. Not in Australia so much. I haven't been engaged to really develop logos for sports people. There's a few that I think are doing it at the moment, but no, not really in sport.
And what about colour palettes and things? Are they... No?
No, not so much in sport in
So
Australia.
you're talking most of the athletes we're in discussion about now, do they have a typeface for their name even?
Not many, no, not many. Some are creating websites. I've seen some websites and they're creating that sort of personalised brand, but still it's a bit like the influencer space generally. A lot of influencers have their own website, their own logo and brand, and I'm seeing that translating a little bit, but it's not very dominant.
So if you're trying to ultimately yield higher and you're trying to build a win-win for everyone, move away from sport and go to like a movies or like a recording artist or somebody like that, how do you see them, what they do and how they yield their IP? How could sport take some of their learnings and adapt it into the ecosystem?
Oh, look, there's a huge ability there to adapt what's happening in other industries into the sports landscape. I think that it's an exciting time because I think we'll start to see more of those innovations really coming into sport. Some leagues and some sports have restraints around what players can do, obviously, with their own brand and the nature of their rights. But I think we'll start to see more of those personalised brands really being built. And I think it's an exciting space that we've not seen much development in, but I think now we'll start to see a lot more of that.
And if you were to give just an athlete that's 15 years old, just started out, well, not started out in their sport, but they're at the potential breaking point of maybe being a rookie, doing their thing, what would you highly recommend them and their parents or their, whoever's looking after them actually do to make sure they're set up for success into the future?
Well, I think they've got to set up who they are and what their why is, why they're going into the landscape of endorsements and brand, and how they have that synergy with their sport. The focus obviously needs to be on their sport and their craft in that area, but if they can also at the same time establish that basis for why and how they're going about a brand positioning and bringing in revenue from that angle and establishing that personal brand early to grow on, I think that that's really core. And I think managers need to be really making sure that young players and young sports people are developing that from the outset and understanding how to use it to the best of their advantage. It obviously can have pitfalls with various issues, but if they're properly trained and given that right focus and advice, they can really use that as a platform for longevity later.
Okay, and my final question is, you're at your end of your career. You then walk off the pitch or the field or whatever you're doing as your last time. What do you recommend in terms of how do you see success post-career for athletes these days? Like, are they just running off into the world, or are you seeing many actually being able to commercialise their brand post-life sport?
Well, it's a bit of a difficult question really, because there's so many sports people and we obviously don't see this huge saturation in the market. But what I am seeing is that a lot of sports people, when they are retiring and leaving that sport, have a lot of opportunities, and I almost feel like it's a bit of a shame that they haven't already stepped into those much earlier. Success is obviously different for everyone moving out of their career and what success looks like, but there's obviously different ways you can commercialise it. You might have put your face and name to a media role, you might have put your face and name to different brands or to different charitable enterprises, and I think that if you've got that stepping stone, that's a really successful way to continue that sort of brand presence and develop that longevity and that legacy for yourself in your craft, and stay in that space for a lot longer and generate revenue from it.
Sarah Galbally, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.